the California way, turn on, tune in, spin out. We have Karl Handelsmann with us and John Cumbers. John Cumbers is the founder of SynBioBeta. He's originally from the UK and his grandfather was from Austria. He has a close friendship to Hermann and his team in Austria, and he chose Innsbruck for a SynBioBeta retreat in 2019 with 100 participants.
Is John also here?
I think we'll show, John should be here as well, and I think we should be able to see the pictures now, if I may ask.
Yeah, John was in Innsbruck in 2019 with roughly a group of 100 people, a lot of C-level executives from inspiring companies like Twist and Ginkgo, Bioworks, and I want to say thank you, John, that you came with this group to Innsbruck. It was a real pleasure to have you there. We had so great discussions and insights in the field of synthetic biology. And I think since then, you're really a close friend. And I'm so happy that you're here and that, you share all your knowledge and insights with us.
Perfect.
Thank you, Jasmine.
I had the pleasure to have an interview with John beforehand, and I was fascinated and really looking forward to this fireside chat. Karl Handelsmann is the founder and general partner at Codon Capital. He invests in early-stage biotech teams. You guys will chat about Californian way. I'm super excited to hear what you will share with us. The stage is yours.
Excellent. Thank you very much. And thank you, Jasmine. I have fond memories of doing breakout sessions for our Thought Leader Retreat on the top of the Austrian Alps. It was quite a remarkable event. So it's good to be back in Austria, albeit virtually, but I'm glad to be able to bring another Californian with me to join us today, my good friend and colleague, Karl Handelsmann, who used to be at Genentech Roche Venture Fund, so he understands a lot about the corporate world of venture. He also now has his own fund, Codon Capital. And Karl and I really bonded over a course that we taught on spinning out technology from university called the Lean Launchpad with Steve Blank. So welcome, Karl.
It's good to be here, John. And hello, Austria.
We could see the Golden Gate Bridge in your background, Karl, right now with some slight modifications to it, which I approve of for the BioWay. I want to start there talking about Steve Blank and the Lean Launch. Where did that course come from? And talk about it running at UCSF. Why was it happening at a university?
So the Lean Launch was something that Steve Blank and some other people came up with as a way to build IT software companies better, faster, cheaper. And I felt that many of the principles could be adapted to biotechnology companies. And it was really an experiment. And that's why we brought you, John, in to help us teach the synthetic biology portion. But we wanted to take the rules that worked for IT companies and map them over to biotech companies. And it turns out it worked fabulously. And it's been a source. Yeah. People in the beginning didn't think it was possible.
Right. So tell us about that. Why? What was the difference between biotech and tech?
I think there are a lot of myths both about venture and about biotech. So one of the myths about biotech is from the time you start to get to success, it's going to require a decade and billions of dollars. And I knew that not to be true from my own experience, both personally in investing. I even have had investments in Series A therapeutic companies where the company was sold in less than 18 months because of the things that they invented. So I knew it didn't. I knew it didn't take 10 years. So how were we able to achieve that? I've done that 4 times. How were we able to achieve that? So bringing those principles in and learning with we had as our students, if you remember, one of our students was the head of surgery at UCSF. So it was a graduate course, but there were many great people like yourself who were involved as mentors, and then even the students were quite advanced.
So we had a whole number of cohorts who are at UCSF, and UCSF is University of California, San Francisco, used to be the medical School of Berkeley spun out itself as a new university. And then we had people coming through as cohorts. They had an idea. They were teams of 3 people, and they were wanting to spin out something, some of their technology from the university. I remember one of them was this innovative heart, this innovative magnetic valve that was for doing stomach surgeries.
And one of them was Pivot Bio. So
yeah, tell us about Pivot Bio.
Yeah, so part of the whole process of the lean launch is this thing called customer discovery. And the idea is, before you raise the money and execute on your vision, build the team and build a product, why don't you find out if your technology is actually solving the right problem? Because after you've spent like 6 months or a year, if you're working on the wrong application of your technology, it's taking you in totally the wrong direction. Because university technologies, there's enough there to have the start of an idea, but you often need to refine and even reinvent the technology to solve a practical problem, whether it's a disease or, in the case of what Karsten was doing, his vision was to be able to use microbes instead of artificial fertilizer in order to grow crops. And I kept pushing him to, talk to like strawberries and small crops. But his vision was he really wanted to go big, and he pushed and talked to a lot of people about how to do this with corn. And he's been quite successful at that. He's been able to build out a company that farmers love the product because it's cheaper than fertilizer. It's better for the environment. And it's now being deployed across farmlands in the U.S., in the United States.
Fantastic. And Pivot Bio is the company. They're a unicorn. They've been going for I think 8 years now. They launched their first product, this nitrogen-based microbial fertilizer, at SynBioBeta at our conference, and we have seen them grow from strength to strength, from a university spin-out, in this case from UCSF, a lab at Chris Voigt's lab at UCSF. Carl,
I think an important point too is that, academic technology, a lot of times it needs some more innovation, some more discoveries in order to be practical. And we just witnessed this through 2 different successful biotech companies. I'm thinking of BioNTech and Moderna, where they each worked on, and it took a lot of discoveries by academic researchers to give them the tools to be able to build these very effective vaccines.
And what do for those who don't know, what does BioNTech and Moderna? No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah.
But it's a good.
I was saying that this is going to be the decade of RNA therapeutics, and someone said, "Well, that's an easy call with the mRNA, vaccines." But we're going to also see with RNA editing and other types of RNA technology. I think this will be we'll see a lot of very, very important therapeutics being developed in that area.
Fantastic. I want to remind everybody that this is a live fireside chat. Both Carl and I got up very early in California at 6 a.m. here to participate. So we would love your live questions. So you can type them in, and we will tackle those questions. So we welcome any questions from you. Carl, the new generation of entrepreneurs are coming up through the ranks. Many of them want to start companies. Many of them want to have an impact on the world. If you were giving advice to them, is the advice that you would give them to start a company, or is the advice that you would give them to join a company? And how should they evaluate that decision?
Well, first of all, the most important thing to you that it's your company and that you're the founder and that you started. I like to joke that, what's the difference between employee stock options and founder shares? And generally they're the same class of shares. It's just the amount. And So the first two companies I joined were, one of them was founded by the first scientist at Genentech, and the other two academics were, in the National Academy of Sciences. I never could have recruited them to join my company at that point. And because it was a very experienced team, I got to learn by osmosis, by hanging around with them, about not the only way to win, but a way to win. And the problem, if you start off and you have never had that experience, you have to learn it all on the fly. So all good entrepreneurs are humble, and they have a learning mentality. And I think that's where you can be a first-time CEO. And I've been actually extremely encouraged, particularly in synthetic biology. A good example is a professor who ran a lab at Stanford, really great researcher, Christina Smolke. She started a company called Anathea, and she founded it. And then she was the first-time CEO of it, her first company experience. And she's been an amazing CEO, not just because she knows how to hire the right people to execute on the technical roadmap, but more importantly, she's been very thoughtful about making the right types of business development relationships, from her investors to corporate people, companies that are in her space, to do business development deals that change the business model very favorably for her company. So, and I think one of my favorite examples is the founder of Impossible Foods, Pat Brown. Same profile, really brilliant academic researcher. But the key to being a success of Impossible Foods, it was a marketing story. And I knew Pat was a brilliant scientist, but I should have asked him, well, why do you think you can market this? And his whole life, he's been very, very passionate about being vegan. He's been trying to convince people to be more vegan-like. So he's been thinking about how to market this his whole life, and he's done a great job of that. So scientists in particular are good at problem solving, and you can, as a first time, taking on a role for the first time, you just have to figure out what the right questions are. And most importantly, just like you do customer discovery to try to figure out what is the best application for your technology, you also want to talk to people who have been in similar situations like yourself. Because the thing that we don't do is we don't share strategies for success between our companies. It's not our fault. Biotech, IT people like to talk about moonshots, but there's kind of like one internet, right? But in biotech, each of our verticals, whether it's a therapeutic or a synthetic biology, there are lots and lots of different moons. And normally your technology has something unique. We call it the search for the business model, the search for a customer fit, the search for how our technology can solve the biggest problem, the most important problem, not the technical proof of concept. And that's another thing that you can fall into a trap is, I want to prove that my technology is viable. Well, if you prove it's viable to do something that people don't really need, you really haven't proven anything at all, and you've improved your technology in a way that doesn't create utility. Yeah.
Carl, you mentioned a moment ago about all the best entrepreneurs being humble. If I think of a couple of entrepreneurs that come to mind, let's say Steve Jobs or Elon Musk.
It's like the question I ask. So imagine, so remember, Steve Jobs made more money on Pixar than he did off of Apple, and he got booted out of Apple. And just imagine if he had been less of a jerk, he could have done even better. Elon Musk is just in a totally separate category. I mean, almost nobody's founded a car company recently that's been successful. And, the whole idea that you can build a rocket company. But he is humble because what he does is he really gets at the fundamentals from the bottom up and the top down. And he works the problem. rather than thinking that, oh, I'm Elon Musk, so it's going to be fine. The laws of physics don't apply to me. My rockets will be able to orbit. He blew up lots of rockets. He's so.
Now, do the laws of customer discovery apply to Steve Jobs and to Elon Musk?
I mean, yeah, of course, because what fundamentally, like with SpaceX, the reusability of the rockets. I mean, you worked at NASA, right? This isn't a new idea, but it's really hard. Now, is it important enough that if you solve it, it's worth all the how much work it is to solve that hard problem? That's the key. So it's not just that he took on a hard problem, because there are lots and lots of hard problems, right? I'm calculating pi out to a few more digits. It's harder and harder. But what's it worth? If you invent a new mathematical way, maybe it's worth a lot. We don't know. But Elon has always picked a lot of the problems he picks that are hard. You know that if you solve them, you've done something to fundamentally help with the business. So similarly in therapeutics, there's some diseases where you're just not going to know till you get to a phase 3. And actually, there's a startup I'm involved with right now. Our first project, everyone we talked to said, and this is where customer discovery comes in. So we talked to a lot of researchers at companies, and they all agreed that the concept that, this would be a superior product. But the problem is what we learned, and we hadn't spent a penny. We hadn't even started the experiments. But what we learned is were we successful and invented this new type of antibody, we would have to spend $300 to $500 million in clinical trials to prove clinically that it was better. And instead, we worked on something that, may get the company acquired for $30 million. And
Carl,
that's a lot more fun. It's a lot more fun for the entrepreneur and for everyone, including the investors.
We have a few questions that have come in. There's a couple of things I wanted to touch on just before we go to the questions. One is the valley of death and the expertise gap in universities. Yeah. Can you define both of those for the audience? And then can you say which of these do you think is the bigger obstacle for university spin-outs?
Oh, thanks for asking that, John. So the valley of death is this idea that there's all this great stuff piled up in universities, and it just needs a little bit of money to get it through the valley of death to create amazing things with it. And there's a gap in money. And I always ask the same questions, which is it? I mean, there's plenty of money if you have a business model where you can make money. Like the idea that, if we just shovel tons and tons of money at brilliant researchers, it will all get produced to useful products. It's a different mindset, and you're solving a different problem. A lot of times, you hit a wall over something that's pretty trivial, but it's going to be hard to work out. Like in therapeutics, like drug formulation. I mean, it's not, nobody's going to win a Nobel Prize for that, but it's not the sexiest problem. But you don't have a product if you don't get it right. So the valley of death is, it's a lack of capital to get things through the activation energy of then the business model being clear. But I argue that the expertise gap is the biggest problem. The reason why it's not clear there's a business model is you have a new technology, and we can even predict what types of technical breakthroughs will happen, but it's very difficult to predict what types of products will be enabled by that new technology. So and why is that? Well, the technology didn't exist in the first place, so nobody ever bothered to ask, well, could I solve this problem with it or that problem? So even in therapeutics, where we find a new way of exploiting biology, a new pathway. Believe it or not, it's not. A lot of times, the initial disease you think you can treat with that is not the best application area. It might be that's the money we came from a grant to study a certain type of cancer, and it might be a different type of cancer. It might be an immunology disease. It could be anything, and so you have to. It may be a rare disease. You don't know, because nobody had that way in of thinking about it. And you're like the first one to ask the question, say, is it a match here? Is it a match there? So that expertise gap to ask the right, correct questions is quite difficult. And it's a search. It's a search. It's not you can systematically and be rigorous about it, but you're kind of trying lots of different permutations. So all of a sudden you're like, oh, this sounds good. But more importantly, not do you think it sounds good, but people you talk to who are experts in that field say, yeah, if you could do that, that'd be amazing. That's what we've been looking for. We've been waiting for someone to invent this. And that's when you know you're on the right track.
We have a question from Mario Orash, and Mario asks, despite Silicon Valley having a historical advantage between Silicon Valley and Europe in VC and angel investing of about 4 decades, he says, what is your take on why Europe has recently overtaken Silicon Valley regarding VC investment return performance? And I didn't know it had, but any thoughts on comparison between Silicon Valley and Europe in terms of investment?
Look, the returns might be better one place than the other, but what's made Silicon Valley great is, everyone who comes here and has a big impact comes here. So there are a lot of people that there's a lot of talent to pull on. There are people that have done similar types of things, and then new people who come in are welcome, and everyone wants them to take their shot too. So it's a very fluid. People you can recruit talent. There's not as much an attitude of you should, what gives you the right to do this. The default is, why aren't you doing what you think you should be doing?
I love it.
So I think that's part of it. Now the return part, right now people talk about in venture that there's a discount on startups. The pre-monies of startups is cheaper in Europe than, say, in Silicon Valley. And there are some companies that are getting these really high pre-money valuations. But the key thing isn't where you start off, it's where you end up. And whether you raise $10 million or $100 million, how are you going to invest that money refining your technology to create value? And
let me just go ahead.
Returns are like, so I do small biotech investing and big biotech investing, but all I care about is the multiple on my money. And it's easier to turn 10 million into $500 million than to turn 100 million into 5 billion.
It's a great insight, Carl. I want to double click on what you said about the culture of Silicon Valley, that in Silicon Valley, you don't need permission to take a swing and try to make it big. It's expected that that's what you're going to do. I want you to compare and contrast that with European startup culture. And we could talk about the UK, where I'm originally from. We could talk about Austria, the host of this Spinouts conference. But then let's also address the elephant in the room, which is Chinese entrepreneurs and their changing culture around entrepreneurship. That Chinese entrepreneurs and the Chinese ecosystem has moved from one of copying to now one of innovation. So how would you compare and contrast Europe versus China versus the US?
I think that there is nothing fundamental about any of the regions. I mean, Silicon Valley has shown that no matter where you come from, you can be a great entrepreneur. and you can build great companies. Even in Silicon Valley, this is still a really, really hard thing to do. And that, I think, is part of it. So, we're doing this conference virtually. I didn't have to fly anywhere. We can all connect. So it's just a matter of putting in the effort to fill in the holes of whatever you're lacking regionally. And I think that can be quite important. I think the harder thing is, you need advice. You're not sure who to get advice from. You talk to lots of people, and giving advice, I've learned to be very careful about it, because it can be quite destructive if you give the wrong advice, or if you're the person you're trying to help hears it the wrong way. They can go off, and if they go off in an unguided missile way, it could be bad. So I think that's also one of the things is how do you, if as an entrepreneur and people at a company and a startup, you always have to you're in control of your own destiny, and seek out the best advice you can get, but test that advice with different people and test your plan. And don't test every single aspect. Don't certain things have a rule of thumb, and it's good enough. But the things where you're making an irrevocable decision on your strategy and creating value relies on 2 or 3 things. Pressure test those 2 or 3 things and you should be able to, from the top down and the bottom up. You should run the thought experiment both ways, not just once, but every day. So you have 2 jobs. One is like all the work you need to do, and the other is strategically pressure testing. And that's where the humility comes in.
Great. We have time for one last question from the audience. Ronald Ratberger has a question about longevity. We've seen a lot of the big bio funds getting into longevity, like A16Z, Mike Andreessen's fund, and Laura Deming has a fund in longevity. Ronald asks, is the first immortal human being already alive today?
I think true immortality is, do we leave the world a better place than when we came in it? And yeah, there are a lot of people who've done amazing things for the world. So be that. Don't worry about living forever.
I love it. Thank you, Carl Handelsman from Codon Capital, for this wonderful fireside chat.
Thanks, John. Thanks, everybody. Have fun.